I can remember the good old days when there were all men in my department, and we didn't have these problems.
The link for me between corporate law and feminism is that I think in many ways they're both studies of power. And that's what I'm really interested in, is figuring out who has power in society and how it's deployed, what ends it's used for, against whom, for whom, and how power relationships are maintained.
Feminism provides a new lens through which to analyze corporate law. So for example, historically, certainly in Anglo-American jurisdictions, the role of directors and officers was viewed to be to maximize shareholder wealth and nothing else. A feminist perspective would suggest that directors and officers have much broader obligations to the community, that they should take account of the interests of workers, trade suppliers and other creditors. They should care about environmental concerns in terms of their productive activities and have a broader obligation to society.
I think there needs to be a place in the discussion of corporate law, of feminism and race issues, because it is the workplace where women and men come together to work, and it is only in the workplace that we come together as racial groups. And it's not an ideal integration because there's still segregation within the workplace, with the top jobs being performed by white men. And some of the more menial jobs being performed by women or people of color. And since the workplace, for the most part, is governed by large publicly held companies, it's important that we discuss issues relating to race and gender, because this is where we can do most of our most meaningful work.
If women ruled the world and made corporate rules, what kind of world would we have? And I don't think that we would have the current 24/7 work week that we have today. Mothers would have never invented those sort of things. And so I think that perspective is quite helpful in understanding corporate law.
I think it's important to consider the issues of sexism and feminism in corporate law. I think it's important to do it in a very broad way. And one of the difficult questions is the extent to which the discussion has to be explicit, because sometimes from a purely strategic perspective, especially when you're dealing or trying to convince people who aren't necessarily already convinced, it's useful to use a strategy of co-opting.
You've had your little joke. Give her to somebody else. I ask for a man.
In terms of how to make change effective, I think things have to happen on a number of fronts. First of all, we have more women in the judiciary now, which I think is a significant advance forward. The Supreme Court of Canada, for example, for the first time has a majority of women. Some of those women come from very strong corporate commercial backgrounds. And I think that the changing nature of the judiciary is changing the nature of how the courts make decisions in the corporate law area.
At one time, the focus of civil rights was on integrating lunch counters and buses and schools. And now the focus should be on the corporate governance decisions that are made in large publicly held companies. We've got to focus on the economic power of women and people of color.
Historically, workers have looked at really 3 shock absorbers to cushion the blows from economic hardship. And those 3 economic shock absorbers have been the nation state, unions, and the family. And we really can't count on the nation state with globalization, and unions have suffered their hardships, so it really leaves the family.
I don't think that boards or upper level executives are concerned about race and gender issues at all.
Catherine McKinnon, for instance, has been someone who has written very cogently about what kind of things power does in society. And for instance, some women have said that women reason in a different voice. And McKinnon would say, well, have men get their feet off our throats and then we'll see what kind of voice women speak in.
In terms of corporations themselves, we need more women in decision-making roles, and we need them in sufficient numbers that they can actually make a difference and they're not just token members. And I also think what we need to do is think about how those boards reflect other aspects of society, such as race and probably really importantly class. So if you have very upper middle class white women, it's probably not going to broaden necessarily the perspective of the corporation. You have to think about how to integrate class, race, and gender into the boardroom.
Women and people of color are not paid equally. They're not promoted in the same way. They suffer harassment and discrimination. Why this disparity? And I think one of the explanations may be that the people who make these policies are white and they are male. And there's far more room for empathy and understanding of the situation that is faced by women in terms of discrimination than there is room for understanding of the situations that people of color face. And I think this is simply because there's a very important concept in feminist theory and critical race theory, the concept of narrative and storytelling and the power of narrative in making law and interpreting law. And when you think about the people who make the law, white males, and you think about the stories with which they're familiar, they are the stories of their mothers, their daughters, their sisters, their wives. So there's far more room for empathy because those are the narratives most familiar to white men. And because of this segregation in our society, it's far less likely that this group that makes and interprets the law will hear the narratives of people of color.
So much of the power that, or the lack of power in society that keeps people from having a real say in government is a lack of financial or economic power. And so I think we need to look at corporations and how they contribute to wealth inequalities in society.
I think workers, especially younger workers, who have seen their parents work 30 years and their parents weren't there to do their homework or weren't there to see the kid in the school play. But then their parents suffered. After 30 years, they got nothing but a pink slip. They recognize loyalty to the corporation isn't worth it. And they're not willing to give like their parents gave. And so at work, I think we need a new deal.
This is the thanks you get for years of hard work. Maybe we don't want to work for you.
Managers and directors should ensure compliance with law and should make socially responsible choices because it is the right thing to do.
I think it's fair to say that corporations touch every aspect of our lives now. That where we used to have local services, mom and pop stores, etc., we're now faced with large chains. Many corporations have budgets that are larger than the size of many budgets of whole countries. So they have a profound effect globally, and if we can actually change some of the approaches, we can actually affect people's lives on a day-to-day basis. Everything from the fact that they're consuming more environmentally friendly products to equal employment opportunities for women, to pay equity for women. All of these issues continue to be a huge problem in our society. So if we can start to change things at the top and start to change the legal framework in which corporations operate, then we can actually have a profound impact on society.